Happy Monday and welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in Brevard, North Carolina. And today we're going to wrap up what are our formal videos on seaming. It's going to be part 5. And I thought, we need to give the crocheters some love. And then I realized what I want to discuss, which is how to take the edge or the top of crochet and seam it together with another piece, like a granny square, like these. These are my granny squares that are, they're pretty small in terms of how many rows I've done, but they're big in that they're big and bulky yarn. But these edges, you can do the same thing if you're, say, in knitting, if you're, say, taking some squares that you have knit to sew together for a blanket as well, in terms of tops and bottoms of knitting meeting as well. So this video is going to be good for both knitters and crocheters in terms of these edges, that the top of a crochet stitch is a little V. See that? And that's a lot like the bind off on knitting if it's done with a classic bind off of knit 2, pull 1 over. Knit another one, pull 1 over. You're going to have very similar looking edges that you can seam together if you want to seam them flat. I've already discussed with knitting, if you're doing a shoulder seam, you may not want this flat edge because it really still shows the edge. So I showed you in part 2, I think, a different way to sew the tops of knitting together to give you more of an invisible seam along the shoulder of a sweater. But on a blanket, when you can see the backside, you may not want a ridge on the backside. You may want something flat. And this is, I'm going to show you actually 2 ways to do a flat seam. One is whip, like my version of what I call a whip stitch, where you can, you're going in a circle. And the other one is what I'm going to refer to as more weaving. We're going back and forth. We're weaving back and forth. And they will give you very different looks. For, again, if you're sewing together, say, granny squares or other square panels. Now, if it doesn't have an edge all the way around with the V's, like a granny square does, you may have to refer to some of my other videos as to how to do the sides, or you may just have to fudge it. I would recommend using a technique that is similar, though, to what we're going to do here. So let's get to it. Here's our descriptions of what's going to happen in Seaming 101 Part 5. Remember, seaming is just sewing with yarn. And for this one we're going to talk about, you can sew with yarn that is the same color as what you're knitting or crocheting with, or a complementary color, depending on if you want the seam to be visible. A lot of what I have been showing you all so far in the seaming series is to have seams where you really can't see them, but this one is one where you might want to. I'm going to talk about flat seams of tops. They could be edges of things, but usually the tops of 2 pieces meeting. We already discussed knitting a shoulder seam where you don't want to see it, so you want it hidden, and it'll give you a little bit of a ridge underneath, but it'll look nice and flat on top. This could also be edges if we're talking about granny squares. And a granny square, if you're not familiar, is something that is crochet. All sides of the granny square are almost like tops because you're going in a circle. This can work for crochet or knit. If you're making a blanket out of a lot of different squares of knitting, you also want to know how to meet your tops and bottoms, or tops and tops, in a flat way without a seam underneath. So both crochet and knitting can use this one. I'm going to have to tag it for both of my playlists. There's 2 methods I want to talk about today. And both of them will make use of what I like to call the top V's. If you look along the edge of the top, so the piece you're making right around this top edge, if you look down on it, they look like they are little V's running one way or another. we're going to make use of those. We're going to go under whole V's. And the direction we go under them will change how it looks. So we have the whips, what I like to call my version of a whip stitch. Sometimes people just put two surfaces together and go wee and just go in a big circle. This is a little more deliberate than that. And what it means is you have to pick two sides. One side you're going to be going bottom up under that V, and the other side you're going to be going top down. It's going to end up being pretty circular. If we have two sides here, we're going to go up, and then we're going to go down, and we're going to go up, and we're going to go down. It's going to create loops that are going to spiral. It's going to be very circular. The other version, which gives you, as we go, woo, the other version, I'm going to call a weaving stitch. There might be an actual fun name for it. I don't know. But you're going to do the exact same thing, kind of mirror imaged on both sides. You're going to, the lingo, whichever lingo works for you, you're going to go bottom up under that V, or you're going to go from the middle out. And it's going to mirror image. So our two pieces here, we're going to start here, we're going to go out, and then back in and out, and then back in and out, and then back in and out. It's going to zigzag. It's going to give you a very different look than the other one. Now, just going wee on a piece of whiteboard doesn't really give you a full example of what it means. We'll look at some pictures over here. But every time you're going middle out, what it'll mean is on one side you're going to go middle right, on the other side you go middle left. Let's put a little arrow there. Middle right, middle left, middle right, middle left. It'll give you a very different look. If I could actually make an arrow, than the one where you're going in a circular motion. But they both will give you a flat seam. That's the important thing. So let's take a look at the whip stitch. Now this is the one where you have to pick a side to go up on and a side to go down on. I've drawn this one as the tops of double crochets. Again, the tops of them will look like V's, and you just put them near each other and you start to go. So I'm going to do what I've been doing in all of my episodes. We're going to number these. We're going to start here with number 1 and use the same lingo as over there. This is the side we're going to go bottom, up. And this side over here is going to be top, down. Before I do step 2, I'm going to fast forward and I'm going to take the sides of these stitches out so we can just focus on those top V's. Some speed up magic here. Step 2, we're going to stay close to this number. We came out right here, from under this V. We want to go straight across and down, from the top down. So we essentially end up back in the center again. Step 3, we're going to find the next V, and we're going to go from the bottom up. Step 4 is to continue this to the V over here, top, down. It's going to be circular, is what is going to happen. Step 5, we're here in the middle again. We're going to go bottom up, step 6, is to continue over to this side, the next V, top down. It's going to be a circle. If we can keep this going, 7 is going to go bottom, under, and up. I'm just returning to the center every time. Hopefully it is helpful. 8 goes to the next guy, and we're going to go top, down. My orange guy gets so mucked up doing this. Oh well. Step 9, gonna go up, bottom up, and step 10 to finish it off is top down. Circular motions for the whip stitch. Now for the weaving stitch, start at the bottom again. Remember, on this one, it's always middle, out, or if it helps, think about it as bottom up. What that means is you're always going away from the center here. Before we show you this technique, let's do what we did with the whip stitch. This one was drawn as knitting with the bind off edge up top, which can often look like V's. But let's black out all the knitting, or like just darken them in, so you can focus on the top stitches. Okay, here we go. Always start with the center on this one. So step 1, center, looks a lot like what happened with the whip stitch. We're going to go under the whole V, but let's return to center to give us a jump shot on what step 2 is going to be, which is going to be under. This is different than the last one. Under and up, return to center. Make it point up here to 3, which we're going to go from the bottom up and come back to center. Step 4, the next V, not the one that 2 just did, but bottom up, return to center. Five, find your next V on the opposite side, bottom up, return to center. 6, find the next V on the opposite side, bottom up or inside out, return to center. 7, keep repeating this, bottom up, return to center. 8, bottom up, return to center. 9, opposite side, bottom up, return to center. 10, last one actually is right there, bottom up, return to center. Not confusing at all, right? So let's see what it looks like on real yarn to either go in a circle or go weaving back and forth. Let's take a look at my 2 rudimentary, rather small big yarn, so they look big, but only 2-layer granny squares here. And if you see the edge, looks like those V's, whether they're pointing down or up, I've got V's going on, right? So I'm going to look for these V's. And even if it's over the corner where it's chains, I still have V's. I'm going to call this my corner here. So here's my first V. I'm going to put the first 3 of these together using more of what I would call a whip stitch. And then the last 3 using a little bit more of my zigzag weaving stitch. So what I have to decide for my whip stitch is which side am I going up on and which side am I going down on. I'm going to go up here and down over here. So pulling it to the side, it'll look like I'm going middle out, but I'm going to go under the top 2 pieces of this, but I'm still going, leaving this on top of my needle and that underneath my needle. I'm going to come up on this side, leave my tail to weave in later, and I'm going to find the first stitch over here, and I'm going to go down on this side. Now I'm going to move my yarn so it doesn't get caught and pull it, whoop, as everything goes out of the way, kind of snug. Now, this V right here is the one I just did, so I got to go here next. I'm going to go, if I turn it like this, I'm going from the middle out, or I'm going from the bottom up to the top. And then on this side, I'm going to find my next V, and I'm going to go from the top down to the bottom. Again, I'll pull my yarn down so I don't create a knot. You want to make sure you're not pulling this yarn through this hole that this is making, because then you end up with a knot. You get my hands in a place where you all can see what I'm doing. Then I find the next one, bottom up, pull it kind of snug. Look over here. This might feel like the next one, but this yarn goes into this hole. That hole is next. Top down. Next V, bottom up. Next V over here, top down. So that's what it'll look like if I go in a circle. And the back side too. It might look slanted, and look, I split some yarn, that's okay. It might look slanted, but it still slashes, right? Okay, the other method of still working with these V's is to go same direction, like mirror imaging on both sides. Middle out, middle out. Let's see what that looks like and how it's different. So my next V is right here. I'm going to go bottom up or middle out. Over here, instead of going in a circle, I'm trying that other method. I'm going to go bottom out, bottom up or middle out on this side. I'm going to weave back and forth. Find my next V, middle out or bottom up. Find my next V, middle out. Find my next V, middle out. Find my next V, middle out. And I want to go all the way up to the corner, so I have one more V up here to really pull my corners tight together. Middle up or bottom out. Middle out, bottom up. Oh my gosh, I'm confusing my words. So this one might be a little less noticeable. This looks a little more like a decorative stitch. So you decide which one you want to use. And if we flip this over, again, you can see them here, see them less up here. if I was doing 2 squares of different colors, I might want either this to match one of the colors, especially for this type of stitch. I might want this, if I'm doing the more decorative stitch, I might want a totally different color, like this. Let's take a look at what I just did, same squares, if I used yarn that's the same color. Same 2 granny squares, yarn that is the same. Let's see what happens. Again, bottom half of this, I'm going to do the whip stitch. Top half of this, I'm going to weave. All right, let's see. So I'm going to take what I think is probably the first one on this side. Bottom up. And then the first one I think is on this side, and I'm going to go top down. I just took the tail from over here, so we're going to ignore that. Okay. If I look at this, the next one is right here. Bottom up. We're kind of making a circle. Top down. Bottom up. Here's my next one, top down. Find my next guy over here, bottom up. Next guy right in here, top down. Now I'm being pretty careful. If I do pull this, I'm pulling it snug but not super tight. If it's really tight, it's gonna tension up here and it's gonna be even more noticeable. But see, we've got this more decorative straight across stitch here. And on the back side, it might be a little more slanted, but it's still kind of a straight across stitch. Okay, let's come. Remember which side is your bottom up and your top down. This is my bottom up. But now I'm going to try doing the bottom up. I'm going to weave back and forth so we can see what that looks like with the same color. So my next V is right here, but I'm going to go, instead of going top down this way, I'm going to go bottom up. I'm going to consider it going off to the left, back to the center, bottom up, off to the right. Bottom up, off to the left. Bottom up, off to the right. Bottom up. And I think one more each should really get us to the corner. Even though it's a chain, I can still find a V to go under without really going into the hole itself. And then bottom up again. Again, so we can see 2 different types of stitches. One which may blend a little bit more depending on the color yarn that's used, and one that might look a little more decorative. But they're both going to seam this together. And if I flip this over, it's going to be flat on both sides. There's no ridge. Like seaming a sweater and knitting, where it might be okay if there's a ridge. If you have top sides or sides that look identical meeting, you can do something like this that's nice and flat. To show how this can apply to, say you had knit squares and you wanted to seam together the tops of 2 knit squares, the bind off. So you can do much the same with the cast on bottom. You just have to find things that look like 2 V's. Because if you look at this, these tops look an awful lot like the very top of a single crochet stitch. We have these V's and we're going to try to go under them. So remember, we are going to go from the middle. Either think about the middle out or think about from the bottom up. If they're facing me like this and kind of curled out, I like to think about it like the middle out. I've got a different color yarn again, and I'm going to find the first V I can here at the bottom, and I'm going to go under that whole V, middle out. Leave a little bit of tail if you're using a separate yarn so that you can come do it again. You can come sew in the ends, I should say. Okay, over to this side, the lowest V I can find is right there. So I'm going to go middle out. I came back to the center and I'm going out the other direction. Once again, I'm going to come to the middle. I'm going to go to the next V up. And I'm going to go middle out. Pull it apart if you need to know which V you're going into next. Really feel around to say, okay, that one I already did. So even though if I hold it flat, it looks like I haven't done this one, I have. I can see the yarn right there. So this is my next V. Middle, under that V out. The other language we've talked about, we're going to come back over here, is if you really turned it so you couldn't see the V, turned it so you're looking at the side, we would want to go from the bottom up, if that makes more sense. You're going from the bottom up to the top under that V. If I come back over here, I've got a V that if I turn it, this is the bottom up to the top. Whatever language makes more sense to you. And every few stitches, we want to pull this snug. See, I waited and I didn't pull it there. Luckily, I've got the bottom showing. What it's going to do is it's going to pull the different sides in. So back over to this, if I need to, I pull it out so I can say bottom inner out. Oop, caught a little bit of that. Middle out. Suck it up. Now, because I'm doing it with a different color, you can see it pretty well. If I wanted to do it with the same color, this would just probably look like extra decorative stitching. If I was matching one color and another color, I would pick a yarn that was one of those colors because then it will just look like little sewing seams on the other block. But if I flip this over, you're going to end up with a flat seam again. There's not going to be a ridge on this side or on this side. Let me do a few more stitches of this one, in and up, bottom top or middle out. Let me do a few more stitches with this other yarn, which is thinner, middle out, middle out. And if I need to use another yarn, I would just take this guy down into the center. And let's thread one of the same color and keep going. Bring it up to about the same spot I just left. Here's where I would start, middle out. This is the last one I did here. Middle out. Middle out under that whole V. Middle out. So that's what it will look like with our first technique, the middle out. It will look like this. Now here's the difference if we did kind of a whip stitch going around. That idea we just came up from the bottom up. So then we'd find the next V and we'd go from the top down. And then we're going to find the next V and we're going to go from the bottom down here up. And then find the next V here and go top down. And then go from the bottom down here up. And then find the next V over here and go top down. And then next V over here, bottom up. So this part right here, I'm making a circle. I'm coming up, I'm going down. On this side, I'm coming up on this side, I'm going down. You can see it looks more like straight-laced stitches, kind of like you would see on a football, right? Whereas the middle out on both sides, zigzagging, going this way, and then going this way, and then going this way, you're going to have kind of an interlocking jigsaw. They're going to look like they just kind of come in and end. Kind of like this. They are not going to line up in a big circle. They're going to go one then the other. Let's look at the back side. Ignore this. This is where I pulled up my yarn to keep seaming. Here is where I went one side then the other, one side then the other. And here is where I was going down then up. Down on one side, up on the other. Down on one side, up on the other. You might see these a little bit more. But if you do that with a contrasting color, something like that, this might be really decorative. So we've just looked at two different ways in the opposite direction, circling or weaving, to do it with knitting. Thanks for joining us on this journey of how to seam together the tops or sides, depending on if it's knit or crochet. For knitting, it's really the tops. For crochet, if it's a granny square like this, it could be all of the edges. We've got two different types of seams, one that's more visible and decorative and one that's a little less visible. The whip stitch or the weaving stitch, at least with my names. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you give it a shot. And may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. I think I'm gonna maybe next week do a little bit of knitting in the round, 2 circulars. That's my thought. There's so many options. If there's an option of something you'd like to see in these tips and tricks that I haven't gotten to yet, please let me know. Write me a comment, contact the shop. Let me know how I can be of assistance. Because like I just said, I really want your crafting to be full of joy and confidence. Please subscribe or at least give me a thumbs up. Love to talk to you. Thank you for being part of the Sun Dragon community. Craft on. Hi, kitty. What are we pondering today? Your paw? Yes. I see. Okay.